Awesome. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Jay. Hi, everybody. Hi. Nice to be here. To be perfectly honest, I'm not actually nervous about this. I just feel bad that I didn't have a little bit more time to organize my thoughts. I'm actually really grateful to Jay because that conversation that we had when he first asked me if I'd be interested in coming here tonight, it sparked a few more conversations and a lot of thought. So I have some good buddies. We all put that meet and greet event on. And I said, listen, I've been asked to give a talk and I'm not entirely sure where to go with it, but I feel like there's something big that needs to be said. And as I just feel this unrest in the culture. I just feel this unrest in the world. And it just feels like this is a time for men to rise. And I was like, Jay gave me this opportunity, this need to actually try and do something, to actually try and put together something, to organize those thoughts. And the more I tried to do that, and I started having conversations with people, the more I realized it's bigger than I can initially. I thought I'd be able to put this together, And I started, and I needed about another day or two to really organize it a little bit more. So it might seem a little bit disjointed, but I'm going to go with what I've got, and hopefully it'll spark really more of a conversation because I don't pretend to have all the answers. That's probably the number one thing that I would put forward is what do we do? I'm not really sure. And then I would say, what do we do? We've got the cumulative wisdom of many decades, maybe centuries here, of living as men. So what else do we have to say to whatever I can bring to the table? So we'll go with that. We'll start from there. And yeah, so I figured we would start with something pretty fundamental, something I think that we're all pretty familiar with. And that is that I want to kind of introduce myself, but just for a reason here. I'm a child of God, and so are you. And that is something we've heard a million times. Some of us, that may mean more than it does to others. And that's, I think, a sign of your maturity in your faith. You and I have been loved into being. We are beloved sons of the Most High God. Okay, again, basic stuff we know, stuff we try to tell others, right? Important stuff. This is the gospel, all right? It's taken me decades to really begin to unpack the depth of that reality, that we are God's beloved sons. That is a profound statement. I think that I have spent decades on it and have decades to go. The rest of my life, I think that me and hopefully all of you will continue to ponder that mystery, that we are God's beloved son. That is something I hope to unpack a little bit tonight. And again, it seems so fundamental, but I think we really need to open that door up a little deeper. And it's the kind of door that you can open for the rest of your life. You can continue. And even once we get into heaven, I think that will still continue to be a journey of exploration. So, we are beloved sons of God the Father. In addition to that, personally, I'm the husband of a beautiful wife. There was a little picture of her up there. I don't know if you could tell, but she's smoking hot. She's really something else. I don't know what she's doing with me. And I'm the father of 6 awesome kids. And I know that Jay's got a big family. Or anybody else have big families or come from big families? How many?
5 stepchildren.
5 stepchildren? All right, good. How about there? 7? Yep. 8. All right. I don't mean it to sound like a competition, but somebody does win at the end, right? Yeah, we're men. Yep. So we're on 6, but hopefully I'm not finished. I've been a father for 12 years, which is interesting because I have a 15-year-old son. My wife and I didn't initially know if we'd be able to have kids. Things weren't working out the old-fashioned way. So we started our family with the adoption of 3 beautiful children. And 8 years into our marriage, 3 adopted kids later, my wife came to me and she said, "You're not going to believe this. We're going to have a baby." And so we had our firstborn, which was our 4th child. And about a year later, we had another one, my daughter Miriam. And then 4 years after that, we had our son Dominic, who was the one I was holding there in that picture there. He's almost 2. That kid they're all awesome. They're all awesome. So I do work as a youth minister. Oh, and we homeschool all those kids as well. I do work as a youth minister when the opportunities arise, which since COVID have been less. I get pretty excited about it. I go to churches, schools, conferences, And I really enjoy it. I come to life a little bit more when I'm with the young people. It brings something out of me. People talk about like getting into that flow state. I'll do a 4-hour retreat with high school kids, and it starts miserable because that's their existence. They're miserable. And then next thing you know, we're connecting. And 4 hours actually goes by pretty quick, and I find myself wishing I had more time with them. So I get into that place where I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, And I don't by any means think that I'm the best at it or anything like that. I know that I'm fully flawed too. I'm a total hypocrite with everything that I say in front of them and in front of you. I know my own brokenness for sure. So I greatly enjoy youth ministry. I also find it very difficult. I also work as a builder, which is what I relied on during COVID when all of my ministry work dried up. I'm a pretty decent builder, to be honest, but I don't get much passion from it. I'm not very excited about it. It pays the bills, and so it's good. I'm also a landlord, which is my most regrettable title. Owning rental properties has been a blessing. I've been a landlord for almost 16 years now. And that's awesome, except it's also horrible. There's almost nothing worse, to be honest. I plow snow commercially every winter. I've come to hate that more and more as well. I'm over 3 years into building a new home for my family. I have no idea when I'll finish. I should have finished within the year that I started, but COVID blew that up as well. And I stopped spending money like everybody else seemed to do. My building company took off. I don't know what all you people were thinking, but I stopped building when I didn't know what my future looked like. Everybody else started building, which worked out really well for me. I have no idea when I'll finish this house. We did move into it in April, and it's been awesome. It has everything it needs to function, just doesn't have things like trim and all the little things that really don't seem like priorities, and I'll probably never get to. I recently became a student again, which I'll share a little bit later. It's both challenging and great as a father of 6 at this point in my life and career. I consider myself a patriotic American. I love to laugh. Sometimes I have a problem with sarcasm. I'm an enthusiastic carnivore, as you can see with some of the activities I'm involved in. I'm also a lover of cheese. Both of those facts have become more evident in more recent years. I like skipping rocks and shooting guns. Wiffle ball with my kids has become one of my most favorite recent activities, and it's one of the main excuses that this talk did not get as much attention as I would have liked to give it. I played over an hour of wiffle ball last night, well into the dark, and then when it was time to come in and continue with this, I pushed my daughter on the swing for another 15 minutes. So it's their fault. Last thing about me, because of the culture we live in at the moment, and this almost seems provocative, although it should be obvious, but for clarity's sake, I am a straight white male. Seems odd to have to say that. So real quick, just a couple minutes, I've tried to paint a little picture of myself and the things that make me who I am. That is what some might say my identity. And that's maybe the buzzword of the decade, identity, right? The irony is that we hear that word all the time in this culture. So much so, the emphasis that's put on it, you'd think that we would all have a clue. But the more I hear about this word used, identity, the more I see how lost we are. We're so lost that people are literally generating new identities by the moment, some even seeking to bend the very fabric of reality. And we're expected to not only recognize, but celebrate them. I saw a person online dressed as a vampire and was saying that people should use the pronouns vamp self. And I was thinking to myself, that's gonna go over really well at a job interview. I don't even mean to laugh, but it's hard to take some of these things seriously, and this is like the actual world we live in. The tragedy is that culture-wide, people have forgotten or denied who they really are, and they try to tie themselves to some superficial reality, some experience they have in an effort to find and define themselves. Some of them have full-on embraced a non-reality. Chesterton once wrote, "When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything." And this seems to be the case. This culture has slipped, lost its footing, that which grounded it in a deeper reality, and now we find it stumbling around trying to find itself. Our deepest identity is not based on some experience or interest that we have. It's not based on a sexual preference or anything else that we go through in this life. Our deepest identity is just how I started. The only one in that whole list of things that I presented about myself that actually matters. Our deepest identity is that we were loved into being by a God who is love and who is crazy about us. A God who revealed himself as Father, which makes us his beloved children. This doesn't change even if you struggle with your gender or your sexuality or any other difficulties that we have in our lives. We are still his, and I think we all know this. I don't think I'm talking to a group that's going to be super offended by my white maleness. But this is the crisis that we find ourselves in. It's ultimately a crisis of identity and meaning. Who are we and why do we exist? We know because we've been taught the things in buildings like this, schools like this, and at church on Sunday. We know who we ultimately are. We are his. We are his children. And that gives us our meaning as well. So we're not confused. But what do we do if we find ourselves living in a world that has forgotten this? How do we live and lead as Catholic men in the current culture, which threatens our values as Catholics and seeks to draw our families away from everything that we believe to be good, true, and beautiful? So first of all, is that true? Is there really a threat? And then the next thing I'd want to talk about is there anything we can do about it? Do we matter in the grand scheme of all this stuff? And if so, what can we do? So we'll start with this: is there really a threat? I would say so, but it's not as obvious, right? We think back to the early church where literally the Christians, they had to go underground or they would get fed to lions, right? Or burned at the stake, right? When was the last time any of us, somebody said, I'm going to feed you to the lions, right? I'm going to burn you at the stake. The early church was full of heroic martyrs. And it's been said that their blood, the blood of the martyrs, was the seed of the church. It's obvious what the threat was then, but today, many of the threats are not so obvious. Some are, and we're confronted with them daily. But on an ideological level, I think it's something deeper brooding. St. Peter writes in his letter in the scriptures, "Be sober and vigilant. The devil is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, steadfast in faith, knowing that your fellow believers around the world undergo the same sufferings." Be sober and vigilant. First, a quick story before I go on here, and it's not my story. It's a story I heard by a priest. We've probably all heard of Father Mike Schmitz. He shared a story one time that really resonated with me, and I just want to recall it. It was about a father in China, and a certain section of China, communist China, where it was not legal to practice our Catholic faith. In certain sections, there's a little more leeway. In this particular province, it was not allowed. And so the church still existed, it just existed underground. So one evening, they decided to have a mass, and it was going to be at this guy's house. But it had to happen in secret. And they would actually put people out in the community to give warning if it got found out, and if the authorities were going to come down, shut it down, arrest them. The real thing was they wanted the priest. They knew that if they could find the priest, if they knew who the priest was, then they could eliminate the sacraments and the faith would fall apart. So this man decides that he's going to take the risk and he's going to host a mass. And they get together, it's 3 a.m, they celebrate the mass, and as they are getting cleaned up, as they're finishing up the mass, word comes back, the authorities are on their way, and everybody scatters. And even this guy's family leaves because of the danger, the imminent danger. But this guy stays, it's his house. The authorities come and they say, we know what happened here, where's the priest? And he won't give them up. And so they say, we're gonna arrest you. And he won't give them up. And so they arrest him and they say, we're gonna torture you. And he won't give them up. And so they torture him. Some of the worst things that we could come up with, they do to him. They use electricity to try and get it out of him. They leave him in the cold. Weeks goes by and they say, just tell us who the priest is and where we can find him. But this guy holds out. He knows that if he gives up the priest, then that's it. His family can't receive the sacraments anymore. The Catholic faith in that area will be gone until hopefully a new priest can arrive in secret. The stakes are kind of high, and he holds out. It's the kind of thing that a saint would do. I mean, it's as heroic as you could imagine, right? It would have been so easy for him to just turn him over. But he holds out. Eventually, they're like, this guy's not going to tell us anything, so they just let him go. And he goes back home, and not long after that, him and his family make a plan, and they escape. They find their way to America. Now, in America, they're thrilled to find that they can go to Mass every day. And so he leads his family, this heroic man leads his family to the Eucharist as often as possible, leads his family to Mass. He also finds that one of the blessings of America is not just that they don't have to hide their faith and they can practice it openly and often, but that the harder he works, the more he can provide for his family. And so he pours himself into his work. And it doesn't take long before he realizes the more I work, the more I can provide. And so he pours himself even more. Next thing you know, he's starting to compromise on getting to Mass with his family. Within a couple of years, he's no longer the kind of guy who gets to daily Mass when he can, but he tries to get to Sunday Mass. A little bit more time goes by, and it turns out that if he works a little bit more, he can provide even more. So he compromises on the weekends too, and he doesn't regularly get to Mass. Another year goes by. He's at least going Christmas and Easter, and then Easter comes one year, and he doesn't make it. And you think back that this is the same guy who was willing to endure torture just so that his family would have the opportunity to risk it all and receive the sacraments. And now that it's available to him, the point that Father Mike makes is that we have to make a decision what we're going to do, because if we don't, the decision will be made for us. What communism, torture, couldn't take from this man, our culture did in a few years without even trying, without even noticing. So the culture that we live in now is not conducive to our faith. And we can really trick ourselves into pursuing things that are good, right? For good means. But if they are taking us away from our faith, we have to reevaluate. St. Peter says, be sober and vigilant. Pay attention. Pay attention. Reality check, you guys. We are no longer living in Christendom. That has passed. The Judeo-Christian foundations of the culture that we thought we could rely on have crumbled away. This is a reality. We can no longer assume that we share a similar vision or even a similar reality with the people around us. This is very concerning. And this can specifically pose a threat to our faith and to our families. Anyone who's been paying attention can feel it. I can feel it physically. I have not felt more unrest, more unsettled, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, than for the rest of my life. And to be honest, things have actually gone, in some ways, pretty well for me. I've had success in other areas of my life, and yet there's this underlying anxiety. My brother said the other day when we were discussing some of this stuff, he said, I feel like I'm always ready for a fight. He says, I go home and I can't even relax and put on sweatpants. I feel like I have to wear pants where if I have to, I can get up and I can go. And I'm like, I think that's a problem. Maybe you should relax. But honestly, that anxiety is real. I mean, more people than ever before are on medication for just that purpose. The levels of anxiety are extremely high, and yet, probably no other time in human history has it been easier to meet our basic needs, right? I mean, there are people who are hungry and there are people who are homeless, but for the most part, the majority of people have the necessities, right? If they're willing to put in the work and the resources are made available, but we're so miserable, we're so lost. I've come to believe that a lot of this has been done on purpose, at least at an ideological level. And I hope I don't come off as a conspiracy theorist. I've never been open to that kind of stuff before, and the last few years have really messed me up. So I'm not going to try to get into anything crazy. But we have some old theories that are reemerging, things that we are hearing not spoken of in the negative light that they deserve, like socialism. And it might be one of the less obvious threats that we're facing, and I think it's at the root of a lot of it. Karl Marx, he wanted to supplant his new revolutionary theory, right? This new vision he had for the world. And he knew that to do so, he had to attack any and all forms of traditional values. He knew that he could not accomplish his goal if Traditional values would stand in the way. So he especially went after the church and the family. It should come as no surprise that the founders of the Black Lives Matter organization, specifically the organization, the founders of that organization, they call themselves Marxists, trained Marxists. And one of their goals, stated right on their website, is the breakdown of the nuclear family as we know it. As if taking more fathers out of the inner city would be a good idea, like we would benefit in some way for that. Marx called religion the opium of the people. We've probably all heard that, but I don't know if you've ever really unpacked that. A spiritual booze that keeps the oppressed satisfied. We, the oppressed, the populace, keeps us satisfied and docile in our oppression. He thought religion keeps you dumb and enslaved. Think about that. As Christians, is that true? I don't think so. Our main symbol is the crucifix, and I was so happy to see that we've got a big, profound crucifix right here that I can point to. Does that look like a slave master to you? It's the opposite. He came to set us free from the slavery of sin and darkness, to live in the light and to have life in its fullness. This alone exposes a fundamental flaw in Marxist theory. Marx seeks to trade real freedom that can only be found in Christ for the shackles of Marxism or socialism. What a joke. And it fails everywhere that it's been tried. I saw this just recently, this week. A little baby in the UK was sort of killed, taken off of life support. Little baby Indy Gregory. I'm sure we've all heard about it. But he was a little baby where they have the state in charge of making healthcare decisions for the people because they foot the bill. This is socialism. And they decided, against the pleas of the parents who went as far as they could to push it, they decided to take this baby off of life support. And within a few days, this baby, Indy, died. The Italian government even offered to take this baby in and care for that baby, to take all of the responsibility of that baby. The parents even signed over so that the baby was an Italian citizen. Just let this child go to be cared for. And the UK decided, no, when we're in charge, we make the decisions, even about life and death. Everywhere that socialism has actually been tried, it has brought death. So do we see this creeping in? Are we noticing this? Are we hearing this? Are we aware? Are we sober and vigilant? Isn't it funny that Karl Marx thought that we were drunk, the opium, the booze? St. Peter says, be vigilant. Do we see it creeping in? This oppressor-victim narrative that's broken the brains of too many college students and young people. It's everywhere. It's insidious. And we need to call it out and confront it to be sober and vigilant. Marx also realized that one main thing to accomplish his goal against the family and tradition was to exploit and manipulate one of man's most powerful drives, sexuality. He knew that if he could normalize sexual deviancy, it would cause more chaos, and the traditional authority and family values would not be able to stand long if this powerful drive was handed over to hedonism. He would be very pleased to see how things have developed today. It's here that I think the cultural attack is pretty obvious in this realm of things. Contraception and abortion have become distorted symbols of freedom. The only thing that matters anymore is consent. With consent, all bets are off as to what's okay. People have even tried to start normalizing pedophilia, which fortunately has seen at least a little resistance for now. In many ways, however, all bets are off. We see the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Not only does that exist, but they were receiving an award of recognition at a Dodgers game. So America's pastime was acknowledging the mockery and perversion of our Catholic sisters. Is that really happening? And does our devout Catholic president have anything to say about it? Those who speak up have become extremists, labeled haters, bigots, threats to the lives of this or that community. Next thing you know, the FBI gets caught basically spying on Catholic churches, keeping an eye on the very dangerous traditional Catholics. Catholic extremism, right? Like Mother Teresa. Easy. Careful. Not exactly the Taliban. The consequences of all this are dire. There is absolutely a threat to our Catholic values. This culture wants to strip you of your family and your families of their beliefs. An all-gay choir in San Francisco recently said it all when they mocked us with the song, "We're Coming for Your Children." This part should be pretty obvious if we're paying attention. They're not trying to hide the ball, and they're motivated. They reject religion and traditional values, even though they themselves have taken on a form of religious zealotry. We've all heard of the rising of the nuns, those with no religious affiliation, as if religion is getting left behind. And yet, when I look around, I see this culture is full of practicing religious people. They're on the verge of extremism. It's not traditional religion as we know it, but it's the age-old adage, everyone's got to serve somebody. Even modern atheists are no exception. We find votive candles to Fauci and St. George Floyd, commercials where Mother Earth is punishing us, climate activists finding the busiest roads to cause chaos and make their stand, which was the most basic lesson from all of childhood. Don't play in the road. You may agree with or disagree with any or all of these movements, but there should be no doubt that they are religious in nature. I wish the average Catholic was as passionate of their beliefs as the climate activists we see today, or the trans activists. There is a threat, period. Can we do anything about it? That's the next step. Yes. In fact, we must. We must not remain passive. Passivity is one of man's greatest temptations because it's a rejection of our masculine duties to lead, provide, and protect. First, we first find this inclination to passivity all the way back in the garden with Adam, where a snake enters, right? The devil enters and tempts Eve. And we often like to say, see, it's Eve's fault. It's the ladies. They're the problem, right? Okay, well, the snake convinces Eve, right, that she should eat this apple. Did God really say that? Calls into question who God is, a rejection of God's authority. This is what we see happening in our culture today. And so Eve takes a bite of the apple. And then what does it say? This is the part we often like to forget. It says she turns and gives it to Adam because he's standing right there. He's with her while she's being tempted by the devil. He's not taking responsibility. He's not doing his job as the man. He's being passive. The opposite of passivity is to take action and to take responsibility. I had a literal opportunity to do something like this a couple of years ago. I was getting home from work, driving in my truck, and I have this really nice piece of property. It's absolutely beautiful. And my kids were outside, and one of my kids was on this swing. And as I'm driving down the driveway, he's waving to me, and then he climbs up onto the swing, and he's standing on it, and this look of terror is coming over his face. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm just getting up to where he is when I see he's pointing to him. My wife starts screaming, there's a big snake in the grass. And it's going right toward him. And I don't like snakes. I'm not like my brother, who's like little girl scared of snakes. But I don't like them. I'm not comfortable with them. People are like, oh, you should catch it and release it. No, I don't think so, right? This was about a 5 foot, maybe 5.5 foot black snake. Not a poisonous snake, but not okay. And it does not go anywhere near my children. So I have no interest in being anywhere near this thing. But I jammed that truck in park to the degree that it almost dropped the transmission. And I jumped out. Fortunately, I had a shovel right in the back of my truck. So as I got out, I already had a shovel in my hand. And that thing was without a head in no time. And it was like, I looked at my son and he was like, yeah, Dad's home. We're good. We're gonna be good, you know? And I was like shaking. I was not happy about it. But there was also something in me that was like, yes, right? Yes. Some deeper thing inside of me was like, don't threaten my family or you're gonna lose your head, you know? We can and must take responsibility. Step up and play a role to counteract the cultural attacks and collapse that we see around us. Now, it's pretty easy when it's a literal snake coming after your literal child. But what are the other things? What are those more subtle snakes, right? I think that for most of us, God bless you, I think for most of us, that snake, it's right here. For us and for our kids. Very, very careful. Not only is that creeping up on your kid in the grass, but it's literally in their pocket already, right? We can make a difference. We have to understand that, and we must. Maybe even more than we realize, particularly in our masculine role as fathers, and I really want to emphasize this. Every man, even if they're not a biological father, is called to at least a form of fatherhood. None of us are immune from this. It's built in. Leadership, guidance, care, responsibility, and protection of those that God puts in our lives. This is naturally where man should be leaning if he fights that passivity. We've all heard that the presence of a good father is the most important and influential factor in future generations. I'm sure you've heard the stats, but I'm going to repeat them anyway. 40% of children in this country are born to unwed mothers. In the inner city, that's actually up to 70%. 1 in 4 kids grows up in a home without a dad present. Single-parent homes is actually the greatest in the US, which surprised me. Children who feel a closeness to their father, and I love the way that this statistic is worded. Children who feel a closeness to their father, it's a little bit more than just present, are twice as likely to go to college or find a stable job after high school. They're 75% less likely to have a teen birth, 80% less likely to spend time in jail, and half as likely to experience depression symptoms. Children in father-absent homes make up for 70% of high school dropouts, 90% of homeless children and runaway children, and 63% of youth suicides. Women are the ones bringing their kids to church, but they have a much smaller impact on getting their kids to church than a father that attends regularly. Something like 90% of kids who have a father who adopts and practices their faith will also do the same. So yes, good fathers play a role, the most important role in shaping future generations. The biggest battle axe that we have right now in this culture is to engage younger generations and our families as fathers. God does not make mistakes, which means he created us in this room for this time. And we need to really consider that. This is our moment. This is the time that there will be new and unique saints that will arise to fight in this battle. It's really cool to consider that. But are we living as if that's true? Now, this is where I get I'm a little jumpy kind of coming around with all this stuff, but I put in here that there are definitely some pitfalls that we can fall into. I already mentioned one of them with the cell phone. Not only is the cell phone, I think, a toxic avenue for our children, but it's also something that easily distracts us, even if we use it in positive ways. It can be used in bad ways as well. But even in positive ways, I know for me, I was in a panic over the last couple of years with COVID. COVID stripped a business out from under me. It also told my tenants that they don't have to pay their rent and I can't kick them out. It was like my whole life got flipped upside down and shaken so all the money would fall out. It was very concerning. And I found myself tied to the only business that was really bringing in any income. And I would get home from work and I would spend the next hour in the presence of my kids, fully involved in my work over the phone, making sure that things were setting up for the next day. We have to find a balance, right? COVID's not a great example because it's a very unique time, but we have to be aware and find a balance of how we use our phones. There was another stat that kind of got me. It said that 20% of men were reported having cheated on their wives. That I found that really disturbing. I don't even like to think about that. Although I actually believe if we really put more thought into that, it would be more. As long as we consider pornography use to be a form of cheating, I think that number skyrockets. I think those things are pretty obvious, right? We shouldn't cheat. We shouldn't be looking at that stuff. But we're also supposed to be vigilant with our work, like I mentioned. What are we really working towards? Like, my concern was money. That was my big fear, right? But how much do we seek that? How much do we chase that? Again, finding that balance is important because at the end of the day, what are we sacrificing for if we're not spending time with our children? What is it really worth? I know personally I get bogged down with the news and all that's happening in the country. I have this anxiety that I mentioned earlier that I think a lot of us are feeling. And I feel like if I don't know what's going on, I'm ignorant and I have a greater anxiety. And so I find myself always knowing what's going on. And I think there's some value in that. But finding a balance with that as well, I think is important. Because how much do you really have an influence over that stuff? You know, to know what's actually happening out there and how to respond, what does it really matter? Most of it doesn't have a great influence, like your sphere of influence isn't affected too much. So again, what can we do first and foremost? Love our families. All right, some practical things that I've come up with. Some of them might even be a little bit controversial, which I actually am kind of excited about. This one's not so much. I would challenge everybody, if you haven't done so already, to find intentional routines for your day, specifically when it comes to your morning and some prayer. Prayer in general should be the kind of thing that's scheduled out. And I'm as guilty as anybody in not following something very well like this. But if you actually think about those days that you've had where things really fall apart, a really difficult day, I would challenge you, step back at the end of one of those days and be like, where did it all go off the rails? Where did this all fall apart? And I think that you'll find that if you spend a little bit of extra time in the morning to maybe hear the gospel readings, right? Check out the gospel readings, spend a little bit of time in prayer and just offer that day up to God. I think you'll find that you'll have a lot more days where you feel grounded, and even if things start to spin out of control, you can handle it better. So finding that time is important. My brother said the other day that if he hits the snooze button one too many times, then his whole day is thrown off. He feels like he's playing catch up all day. And I realized that when he was saying that, I was like, that is absolutely true for every one of us. That 9 minutes, what do we sacrifice? Prayer, every time. Every time it becomes prayer, because the practical stuff has to happen. You got to get your teeth brushed. You got to, get something to eat. You got to do this or that, and you got to be into the car at this time, or you're going to be late, right? The thing that gets sacrificed is the thing that grounds us for the day. So it's important for us to remember that and to schedule that in and to try and keep that routine. God does not want us to live in that place of stress or despair. In the same way, none of us want to see our kids get bogged down. God is a father in a really important and real sense, and this means that we are his children, and he wants to be close to us, to spend time with us. He doesn't have a cell phone, so he's fully attentive to us, unlike the rest of us. But are we attentive to him? I'm noticing the time, trying to think about ways that I can skip through a little bit of this. I was going to tell a story about my son Gus, and it would have blown you away. You would have loved it. But I'm going to skip it. He's so awesome. He's so good. He's so good. All right, so again, practical things, tangible things. I guess they might even be a little bit controversial. You want to leave a legacy and actually put some hope in this world. To see that things are crumbling around us in this culture, this nihilistic culture that's super confused, you want to do something to really engage that. Raise a family. I know, not a big surprise. Raise a family. Have another baby. Yeah, oh, but I'm old. You don't understand. Do it anyway. Try it again. Jay, where you at? There you go. There you go. There is no more radical act that a person can do right now than commit to a lifelong marriage and have a baby, or even better, a whole bunch of them. All right? Not only are they fun to make, I fully endorse that, but they represent so much more. Jordan Peterson has become a pretty prominent person in the last few years. He says that this is the fulfillment of a person, to create and nurture something that will outlast you, a vision for the future as something hopeful and enduring. As Catholics, we know that marriage is a life-giving love, the closest thing we have to a trinity of persons, the love between a husband and a wife that gives life, generates a child. Similarly to the Trinitarian theology of our God, the love between God the Father and God the Son that eternally generates the Holy Spirit. When we create a family of love, we are most reflective of the God who made us and loved us into being. To create a family for the glory of God is to even conquer death itself. Not only will those children outlast us in this life, but through the work of Christ accomplished on the cross, we live beyond this life and our families build up the kingdom of heaven. Jesus not only gives us a life-giving love, but it is an eternal life-giving love. So have a family or another baby and devote yourself to them. Be willing to sacrifice on their behalf and to lay it all down. Now that might sound a little extreme, and here's another controversial take. You may need to simplify your life. If that means you don't make enough money or whatever, you may need to simplify your life. And I would encourage you to pull your kids out of school if you have school-age kids. I think that it's maybe a moral responsibility these days to take your kids out of public school. Controversial take. I don't care. All right? It's not easy. Probably the most difficult thing that my wife and I face on the daily is homeschooling our kids. It is absolutely crucial to keep our kids away from these messages that are going to be detrimental to their souls. That might mean you have to sell your house and downsize. That might mean you need to change careers. I don't care. It's time for you to think outside the box. The other thing, unpopular opinion, you should make whatever necessary changes to keep your children's mother home with them while they're young. Sexist, right? Misogynistic. I don't really care. Honestly, I don't really care. You can tell me I'm crazy. I don't really care. My wife is gorgeous, and she's going to be there when I get home, and everything's going to be fine. You don't have to like me when I say these things, but I think it's true. I think it's really true. And if you're a grandfather, you should encourage your kids in this same vein. The greatest gift you can give your family is maximum time with their mother while they're young. If that's not an immediate reality for you, which maybe it's not, set a plan in motion to make that work so that their mother can be with them. Mothers hold the world together. They clean and dress and feed saints in the making. The saints of the near future, future priests and religious, future strong moms and dads will overwhelmingly come from homes where decisions were made and sacrifices offered up so that the mother is not working but is home with the children, particularly while they're young. Now, what if we find ourselves in a position where the culture's already infiltrated our families? What if we find ourselves already knocked down, right? When we talk about these problems in the culture, they are our problems. They're things that are in our lives. Probably all of us know somebody that's in our family that's caught up in some of these ideologies where they've lost their faith, where they find themselves distant from the vocation that God has called them to. What do we do with that? I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I do. But we do know that we're supposed to remain faithful. We're supposed to remain faithful, and we're supposed to lead our children to Christ. We cannot be passive. That's the one thing we can't be. You have to have hope. And with that in mind, if you find yourself in a need for real help, I mentioned that I'm a student again. I'm looking to become a counselor to help people who find themselves in that position. There's a program called Catholic Psych, and it's basically a mentorship program. It's super convenient. It's over an app. You actually are assigned a mentor who walks with you through all these things, and it's all from a lens of Catholicism. It's all from a lens of, like, all the good things of modern psychology are included and utilized. All of the weird stuff that we're not interested in, that's totally wacky, is thrown away. And we look at the human person as made in God's image and likeness and destined for heaven, and that's what we work toward. And it's a beautiful thing. Catholic Psych is worth checking out and sharing. And I don't benefit in any way. I'm not even part of it just yet. I'm just learning. But it's a really, really good tool that I think there's a really big need for. So I don't have all the solutions, and I don't expect, to come up with them in any sort of immediate way. But I do know there's hope, because in the end, we know who wins, and we actually have the fortune of engaging in a battle where we already know the outcome and that we're on the right side. So that's kind of exciting. I took inspiration the other morning as I read that there's a prominent public atheist figure who has declared her conversion to Christianity. I'm just going to introduce her real quick, and I'm going to finish this up because I know we're running a little bit past time here. Her name is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she was born in Somalia as a Muslim, and she escaped the extremism of that culture, and then she denied God for 20 years of her life, up until just recently. She announced that she's turning to Christ, mainly because she sees Christianity as the only remaining set of ideas and institution that, quote, designed to safeguard human life, freedom, and dignity. Take that, Karl Marx. She argues that it was Christianity, and I read that specifically as Christ, that saved humanity and set the foundation for any chance at real human flourishing and freedom. Atheism, she said, is ultimately unlivable and even self-destructive. It won't even allow for deeper discussion about the meaning of life. For Ayaan, this broken world and failing culture was the key. So that's what I find interesting. We can talk about all the problems we see. This is what led her to Jesus. The incoherence and suffering brought on by the godless ideologies and meaningless pursuits ultimately exposed itself to be empty and unsatisfying. Her conversion to Christ, hopefully followed by many more, as well as our own continual conversion, is the inspiration this world needs to be regrounded in the fundamental reality that we started with. We are beloved sons of God. And that truth sets us free. Jordan Peterson said recently, we recognize that we are called to something bigger and to do something, to have influence. And I love the way he put it. He said we need to tilt the world toward heaven with our lives, away from hell and toward heaven. So how do we fight? Tilt the world toward heaven on the daily. How do we really, what is the practical things? It's all the stuff I mentioned, but it's mostly raise your family. Be a father in some positive way. And I want to just finish with this quote that I have on my phone from Cardinal Sarah, and I just thought this was awesome. He's talking about civilization. He says, among the institutions that seem suicidal and decadent, there are true seeds of renewal. I have met many generous families that are deeply rooted in the Christian faith. I have seen fine religious communities that are faithful and fervent. They remind of the Christians who, in the twilight years of the Roman Empire, kept watch over the flickering flame of civilization. I want to encourage them. I want to tell them, your mission is not to save a dying world. No civilization has the promises of eternal life. Your mission is to live out with fidelity and without compromise the faith you received from Christ. In that way, without even realizing it, you will save the heritage of many centuries of faith. Do not be afraid because of your small numbers. It is not a matter of winning elections or influencing opinions. It is a matter of living the gospel. It is a fire. A person himself must be on fire in order to transmit it. Watch over this sacred fire. Cardinal Robert Sarah. And I love that. I thought that just encapsulated the whole thing. What's the solution? Same thing it has been for the last 2,000 years. Live the gospel. Live the gospel. So people sometimes laugh because they say, what do you tell these young people? You go and you do a 4-hour retreat with them. What do you tell them? I just tell them about Jesus. Just tell them that this matters. And yeah, but how do you get their attention? Oh, it's the same old story. It's the same old story. It's an eternal story. It's the only story that has consequences beyond this life. So let's open our eyes to that and do our best to live it. Amen? Amen. Amen.